to our adult class. We have for some time now been going through a series of studies on Now That I'm a Christian, What Now? And we continue that. Last week we completed one section. We're going to the next section, which has to do with understanding Satan and his devices or his characteristics, our great enemy. And if you have your Old Testament, you can turn to Genesis chapter 3, which is where we left off last week. We'll look at verse 1 through 6. We started this, but I want to go back and just read this section, and then we'll look at some things pertaining to the first temptation that we see, at least the first occasion of seeing Satan in action. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 through 6. Let me read this. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as God, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat. And gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. As we study this, I think we get a glimpse of Satan, the nature of Satan. And as we mentioned last week, he appears here to Eve in the form of a serpent. I don't know why form of a serpent. I'll leave that to your own conjecture. But nevertheless, he appears to her. And I think we should begin to discuss verse 3 and perhaps verse 4 when our time ended last week. But let's look at verse 3 for a moment. Verse 2, I'm sorry. And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. Now, I remember asking the question, did Eve understand God's command? Yes. There was no confusion in her mind. It wasn't, well, let's see, I think that was the tree that, no, let's see, there was one tree that God said not to eat of, not to touch. No, it was clear in her mind. So there was no ambiguity. She understood perfectly what God had said, that they couldn't touch it, certainly and not eat of it. Now, look at the nature of Satan. Look how he approaches this. Verse 4, And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. Just the opposite of what God said. Did Satan understand what God had commanded Eve? Do you think he understood? Sure he did. So he begins to contradict. He said, Listen, no, you're not going to die. And then he offers this, which was no doubt very appealing to her. When he said, verse 5, For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil.
Hey,
yes.
there's two kinds of deaths here.
I agree.
There's physical death and spiritual death.
And maybe that's something we need to bear out, and you're correct in that, Tom, because physical death would not come until later. We all know that. They ate of the fruit, both she and Adam, and of course they were cast out of the garden, so they continued to live physically. And Tom brings up about a point that we need to bring out, that spiritually, they were separated from God, because God cast them out of the garden. All right? So, Satan Does Satan give us half-truths? Maybe that's a better way of saying it.
That's what it was. Yeah, and he knew that you're not gonna die immediately. You're gonna die. And God said you're gonna die. And he started the death physically that day, and the spiritual death happened that day.
The spiritual death, but did physical death, would it also come about?
It started, yeah.
Where did it start with? Who did it start with?
Adam and Eve.
It started with Adam. Why?
They were separated from
It was
the
livestock.
Lord. This is you.
Because of sin. Yeah. The wages of sin is what?
David.
Death. And even Paul makes the argument in Romans, in the book of Romans, that by one man sin entered into the world. He had reference to Adam. So, it was very much a half-truth here. And that's part of the deception of things. Now, and thank you, Tom, for bringing that up. Look at verse 3. When he says, God has said you should not eat, it's actually verse 5. For God doth know the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods. Is that appealing?
Right. Sure.
It is. To think that, do we not all want to have greater knowledge,
Yeah.
more understanding?
It said there's no good and evil, so.
Yes, and it says here not only are your eyes going to be open, which when I read that, I interpret that you're going to have more knowledge, you're going to have a greater perception about things. How do you view that when it says your eyes shall be open?
You understand?
Yeah, I think so. And then he says, ye shall be, verse 5, as gods, knowing good and evil. Who doesn't want to be like God? And,
There's also, an insinuation there I had the thought in my head, it didn't, not coming out my mouth, but it's not really even so much as half-truths, as he will tell his lie or his version of the truth that he wants you to see, and then he puts a little sliver of truth in there as that hook to get you. And the whole idea of being appealing to them that they're gonna God has been this entity to them that knows everything, and it's insinuating that it's going to elevate them into a position of power like he has. And that little sliver is that hook that pulls them the wrong way.
And when he says your eyes are going to be open, he was partially correct there. But it wasn't the way Adam and Eve expected it. After they partook of this, what do Adam and Eve, not Eve's, no, dead. I bet Scotty's doing this, so I said three numbers. I don't know, still something on.
Go ahead, we'll figure it out.
All right. But when he says your eyes will be open, after Adam and Eve had sinned, they both were partaken of this fruit. What do they do next?
Realize that they're naked before God.
And they sew themselves clothes out of fig leaves. Now that wasn't adequate because God made them clothes out of what?
Animal skin.
Yeah, out of skins to completely, cover themselves. But they realized we're naked. They didn't have that perception before. So it was in a true state of innocence before this sin. And truly their eyes were open in a lot of ways that I don't think they expected it. So it did change with them, even in the sense of their perception. And I don't understand exactly how, other than saying they were in a state of innocence. And perhaps, this is an opinion, okay? Maybe it was like our children when they were young. A 2-year-old. Do they have a sense of modesty? I mean, they don't. They don't understand. They all run through the house and get their diaper off and they're free. They're happy. There's no concern there. But if that child is 16, hopefully it's going to be much different. Okay? You get the point. And maybe that was the sense. They were in this state of innocence. But when their eyes were opened after this, it wasn't like they thought. Michael?
You know, before the sin, that's all they knew. And how they could comprehend the other side of that, they couldn't. Just like us, you know. For us today, we've lived on this side of that all our lives. How can we comprehend no sin? You know, complete innocence, complete obedience to God. It's hard for us to imagine a society where we live all day like that.
Well, it wasn't. I'm sorry, Michael.
That's okay.
Yeah, this is a great comment. I'm up here pegging this. We're getting something now. But true, sin changes everything, and it would for them, even though they didn't know it. But yet, Satan is picturing this great. Okay, it's what you want to do. You should want to do this, and so often, sin temptations do appeal to the flesh. Have you ever heard someone say this, or maybe you've even said it? I'd like to give them a piece of my mind.
Yeah. Oh, I don't have any to spare.
All right, what does that mean? It's a feeling I want
To share knowledge with them.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a unique way of saying it. You sure you're not saying it? I don't know. That sounds so good. You want to educate them and help them. No, but you get the point. That doing this is what I want to do in the moment. Maybe it is, if you have a problem with alcohol, maybe it is, this is what I want. Lust of the flesh, same deal. This is going to bring me gratification. When David was up on top of the rooftop and he sees this beautiful woman bathing herself, he desired her. He wants her. Now, I've often thought that David inquires, he finds out she's married, it's going to be adultery, she's off limits, but yet he pursues this, he continues this. But if he could do it over, having witnessed all the pain, the betrayal of her husband, having him put to death, the punishment God brought upon him, the sword would never leave his house, the baby that was conceived would die. There'll be another who will take your wives in public manner, and it was his own son Absalom, who would lay with your wives, knowing that you've been brought down. How often, if he could have gone back and redid that night, how his life would have been different. So whatever desire that may have been at the moment was not worth it in the end. Ronnie?
Verse 17, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Right there's where he put that slavery in there. Thou shalt surely die. He put the word thou shalt not surely die right there.
Yeah.
And that right there is the first word that was ever added to the scriptures, to God's word. The word not. And right there's where he put it. And it meant both physical, he was talking about, and spiritual.
Sure.
We ought to be sick. We're living on this side of it all our life. And it's hard to, it'd be hard for us to know what the next life.
Yeah, there was a preacher once who preached a sermon on the devil's tail, the knot in the devil's tail. And of course it was that very thing that he said, "You shall not surely die." All right, but Satan, he pictures this, it's desirable. It's what you want to do. And her response, verse 6, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, a tree to be desired to make one wise. Now you look at this. Once she sees this tree in a different sense, he said it was pleasant to the eyes, desired to make one wise. All that, if Satan was up here and he was painting this portrait of how you should look at this, it was all pleasant. It was all desirable. It was something, you need this. And she did desire it. And once she had desired it, it was pleasant to the eyes, it looked great, good, whatever, then she did sin. she took of the fruit, and did eat, and gave also to her husband, and he did eat. But we get a first glimpse of Satan, and we see how he had beguiled, how he had tricked, if you will.
He's very crafty.
Yeah, very much so. And we're going to look at a lot of other scriptures here as we go through this to look at his nature, and it does describe him as being crafty, as one who can so mislead us. And that's the reason we've got to be extremely careful. We need to, I think as Michael said last week, we've got to know our enemy. We need to know his devices, and this will help us. All right, other comments about this section here of Satan.
And then they heard the voice
I'm
of
sorry?
the Lord. Then they heard the voice of the Lord in the garden.
Yeah, it was very
Come back.
different then.
That would be,
Yeah.
kind of a
And do you think Adam and Eve regretted this?
Yes.
I'd say they did.
Absolutely, okay.
It puts me in mind always of the parental relationship that God has with us. And I can see the child listening to that sliver of truth and wanting to believe it and following it, and then saying, oh man, what have I done? I should have listened to the parent instead of the lie. And then God, the Father, he says, what are you doing? You're wearing these leaves. They say, well, we were naked. And I love the response. Who told you you were naked? I didn't tell you this. Who told you this?
It's that knowledge you got.
Yeah.
Yeah, that had changed everything. Butch?
Dave, I think the biggest thing, we have to look at the end results of this. And it's just like a person that has a problem drinking stuff and say you was out with a bunch of friends and they say, well, it's good to drink now, but you'll feel better. But it's a possibility you can get out and have a car wreck and kill someone else, and that's the end result. So,
Yeah, let's talk about the consequence here. Yeah. When they violated God's laws here, what was the consequence? How did they suffer? Did it change anything? We've already talked about their clothing. They recognized, had the perception, I'm naked and we need to clothe ourselves. What else did it change?
They lost it.
What about and you're right, yes. Take that further. Do what? There you go. And that's what I wanted to look at a moment. Drop on down to the text here. Verse 16. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Opinion. What does it mean, in sorrow thou shalt bring forth children? How do you interpret that?
Pain.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's the pains of childbirth.
But there's also the pain of bringing that child into an imperfect, sinful world that she helped create.
I hadn't thought about that. Okay.
That might
I hear Elvis Presley singing in the ghetto in my head.
I've never thought of that either. That might be even a bigger issue if you think about that.
But on the other hand,
But I mean, in addition to the pain.
and I'd like to hear your thoughts. The Bible also says, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. So I have counseled couples in the past who said, we've decided not to have children. And I don't tell them you must have children. That is a personal choice. But I have even mentioned to others, I don't think I understood love fully until we had children of our own. So I don't think that's a reason not to have. But surely it does. Any child, any person brought into the world must face the reality of sin, good and evil, and the consequences of evil. Michael.
But what kind of a blessing would it be to hold that baby it's the first time and knowing they're gonna face a life with none of that. It's a changed game because of what they did.
Yeah.
I never even thought of that. That's an amazing thought.
All right, and that's good, because I hadn't either. But I'd always interpreted, as being the pain, the difficulties of bringing forth children.
But the pain and the difficulty of the children goes far beyond that pain.
Just
That pain, if you hear mothers, my mother anyway, that pain is gone. The beauty and the joy made all of that pain worth it and go away. But that worry and that pain of living in this imperfect world never goes away.
Oh, that's
Worrying
good.
about the child's soul now, in addition to all the physical things.
And I will say, even I know in our family, maybe this is more reflection on me, but Connie is more attuned to, the children, the boys' sufferings, good or bad, And of course, we both, would be more faithful, two of the three. That this would happen and that, and so good point.
I don't think you ever quit worrying about your children or your grandchildren.
Yeah. All right, good. Great discussion here. One reason I like that, I have been to congregations, and maybe it's because they had a cantankerous person or two in the audience, but they didn't allow the audience to participate at all. In other words, you skip our lecture. To me, I've never liked that. As long as we do things in order, I learn too, and get a different perception some of you have brought out here. So in sorrow shalt thou bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. What does that have reference to? I think just what it says. We read later on that Paul in Ephesians chapter 5, the husbands were to be the head of the wives were to be in submission to the husband. Does that mean the husband's better than the wife? No. No, of course not. He's not superior in any way. And it's not cultural. Paul makes that argument in 1 Timothy chapter 3, and he points back to this very occasion that the woman was first deceived, and then the man. But regardless, that's one of the consequences of sin here. And thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And then we talked about Adam. Verse 17. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and thou hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return to the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and to dust shalt thou return. What a powerful consequence to man. He was saying simply, life is not going to be easy. In sorrow shalt thou eat. I'm trying to find my place here. And thou shalt not, let's see. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. He was talking about thorns and thistles the ground would bring forth. Verse 19, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. Life is not going to be easy. I had a young person tell me once, and it really made me think, because there's difficulties in every age. Okay? I think we all would admit that, or understand, or agree with that. But where he was coming from, life is so difficult. How does anyone expect me to buy a house? House prices have just gone crazy. Some of you can understand this. Rent. Listen, rent's gone crazy. Everything's so expensive. How am I to do this? I wish I didn't have to grow up. I wish I didn't have to leave mom and dad's home. And I think of this, that life is, I don't care who you are or what state, life is difficult. Sin brought all that about. I'm not saying you can't make it, okay? I'm not saying you can't, just as all of us, you start on the bottom and you build your way. I know that physically. But all I'm trying to say is, all this comes back to the very beginning. The consequence of sin.
It's going to be in the sweat of your face. You're going to make your living. It's not meant to be easy. It was easy at home. Mom and Dad was doing it for you. It's not easy now. Ted, get you out of it.
Yeah, I did. Oh, so what Adam and Eve lost, or potentially lost, who knows what God originally had planned. You know, he made Adam, he made the animals, he saw Adam was alone. Go to sleep, I'm going to create woman for you. Maybe God planned to, you know, or later, whatever in the realm of things, he would have seen, they need something more. Go to sleep, Eve. Here's a child for you to love. See, and you eat of these trees and you live this peaceful, beautiful, sinless life within this garden. But you gave that up, so now in pain, away from what I did, you know, now you can work for it and you can toil and you can worry instead of me being the one doing it. So potentially they gave up all of that also.
Oh, even the sense of bearing children without the pain and sorrow. I don't know how God would have done that. When we think of childbirth, we can obviously see.
He could have done it however he wanted.
Certainly.
He created her from a piece of bone and made him from some dust.
Correct. And how did God keep them from benefiting from this garden? The last part of the chapter.
He stood a guard there.
Yeah,
with
he
a
cast
fiery
them.
sword.
Right, he cast them out of the garden, this place of paradise, and a flaming sword, if you will, that they could never again enter into this realm. This realm was that of perfection. It was different than what the world would be like. The pain, the difficulties, the sorrow. And surely they would have looked back and, you know, the old saying, boy, did we have it made. But that was the consequence of sin. It always brings more problems than we ever imagined. Butch used the illustration of, you know, of taking that drink. Maybe it's a young person, they're at a party or whatever. You know, graduation is many of our high schoolers, I'm talking about in the county and all over the world, the country. You know, they're celebrating perhaps, and one of my not earliest necessarily, one of my early funerals was that of a man who the plant they was working at was shutting down, and he was going, and they had a big party afterward, and he's intoxicated to the point he's driving home, and he's wrecked and he's killed. How do you preach that funeral? He wasn't a Christian, he wasn't a member of the church. And how do you preach that? What do you say? How do you give comfort to the family?
That's hard to do.
It is hard to do, especially when you're an inexperienced preacher as I was, and you were asked to conduct this funeral. There's just not a lot of great things you can say. There's no hope spiritually, and I surely didn't try to give them any hope spiritually for this young man. That's between he and his God, and I think we all understand he wasn't a Christian to start with. But what a waste. Oh, but when we're drinking, we're, you remember that? Oh, it was so fun, so happy, but it was short-lived. How sad. What's that saying? You know, sin takes you further than you ever meant to go. It costs you more than you ever intended to pay. Becky, you ever heard that? Do what?
Keeps you longer than you intended to study.
All right. But there's a lot, you know, there's a sermon in that. The consequences of sin, and little did they understand just what it's just a fruit. So what? And that's the way you try to teach young people today about, you know, today the big thing is don't get married, just live together. LTA, living together arrangements. And who needs a piece of paper to say that we're married? And then when you begin to break it down, all the negatives toward living together without marriage, it's not all great after.
Well, it's interesting, David. This is the beginning of creation, the beginning of time. As we know it from the very beginning, God was teaching authority. He was teaching being content. He was teaching how to provide for you. And I think with the new converts, and even before they become a convert, they need to understand that. This is the God we serve. He'll take care of us. Just be content, learn to be content, and that's a process, of course. But also the concept of authority, or, principle of authority. It's something so simple, just don't eat it. Don't eat it. It's that simple. Well, don't bring mechanical instrument in worship. It's just that simple. It's a simple command. But, as a new convert, that we're talking about here, they need to know these things. And like I said, even before they become a child of God, they need to realize what's to be expected of them, and the nature of God alone.
Yeah. All right. Good. All right. Anything else you want to bring out about Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve, the first sin? We've taken it a little further than I intended, which is great. But we want to look at the nature of Satan, how deceptive he is, how trickery. And we're going to look at several scriptures here in just a moment. But I do think it was wise for us to look at the consequences of sin. Because to us today, we look at things and, we say somebody, John Doe and Mary Doe, whatever, they're married. Yeah, one of them, fell. They hooked up with someone else, the phrase is today. Big deal. Not so what. But, again, the consequences after the fact, all the problems, the heartache, the sorrow, and distrust, and betrayal, and divorce, and children, and we need to stop and think about the cost of sin. Right.
That's one thing I was thinking about through here. The thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to eat. Where they're eating?
Mm-hmm.
Well, years ago, I used to think, what happened? And I got to Noah, whenever he put the bow in the sky, he said, no longer will I curse the ground for man's sake. And I always thought that was what he was talking about. That's whenever he done away with the thorns and the thistles and everything on the ground whenever they brought forth food, except for the imagination of man's hand from his youth up.
Now, I think that had reference to the flood, that he never again destroyed the world with the flood.
But I always put that together with thorns and thistles shall it bring forth. He didn't curse the ground for man's sake. And the thorns and thistles ain't found in every garden that grows food.
All right, well, they're in mine. I just sent the rubber tail over mine yesterday. All right, let's turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Look at verse 3 for a moment. And Paul gives an insight about Satan, his angels, and so on, that I think will help us. Second Corinthians chapter 11, we'll start with verse 13. All right, the text reads, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. What does that tell us about Satan? Does he appear to be evil? We have these people have depicted Satan. He's got this forked tail, and he's got these horns, and he's red, and he's got this pitchfork he carries around. Is that the perception that the Bible has of Satan?
They got him looking like disguise himself to where he looks like a good, honest, presentable fellow.
And that is exactly how he tries to portray himself.
Where'd you read that at? 1 Corinthians?
No, 2 Corinthians, chapter 11. 2 Corinthians 11:13. Thank you for asking, Ronnie. I want you and everyone to follow along. If you have a question, ask. 2 Corinthians 11:13 through 15. All right, so it says, false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ, Satan himself, transformed into the angel of light. So, again, to Eve, go back to Eve for a moment. Did he present himself to Eve as I want to destroy you? I want to bring harm to you. I want to see you suffer.
He's
No.
beautiful. He's
Pardon?
beautiful and tempted.
Yes. And the things that he had to say they were alluring. She saw that it was pleasant to the eye, desired to make one wise. I want to be like a God, don't you? I mean, he didn't say, I want to destroy you, woman. That wasn't his attitude. Wasn't how he brought it about. But it says in verse 14, Satan himself transformed the angel of light. Verse 15, even his ministers as ministers of righteousness. And in the context, if we're fair to the context, Paul was talking about doctrine. He was worried, he was concerned about the Corinthians following false teaching. And I think that should be a great concern to us all, especially here we are removed from this time period, several thousand years. We have seen the results of false doctrine. We see all the division that is about us today, how treacherous it is, but yet, excuse me, every one of us know people, good people, who are members of various religious groups that are not following the Scriptures, I would contend. Yeah, they're great people. But I do believe, unfortunately, some have been misled. And here we find Paul even giving the Corinthians this warning, saying, listen, they're false apostles, they're deceitful workers, yet they've transformed themselves into apostles of Christ. It's not to say that I have a little lapel on here, I don't have, but, a name tag, hi, I'm David, I work for Satan. You don't see that. But yet, so many people have been misled deceitfully, according to verse 13. And so, how do we know what's good and bad? How do I know what's right and wrong? And again, this is talking about doctrinally. How do I know? How can I know? It's the Scriptures. And I'm going to warn you, and I've said this many times, so has Tony, don't believe anything I say unless you read it and study it yourself. You can't stand on the day of judgment and say, but my preacher, David Irick, said, is David Irick the standard? David Irick has been wrong. David Irick's still growing. So it is your responsibility to open up the Bible. And is that true? Is he rightly dividing this? I saw a bumper sticker yesterday driving home. Connie and I had been out birding that morning at least. Saw some of the beautiful creatures God has created. So we're coming home, and a car in front of me has a bumper sticker that says John 3:16. Anything wrong with that bumper sticker? No, it's a beautiful bumper sticker. It's portraying a wonderful truth. But I wonder, and I couldn't help but wonder, if they believe that's the totality of God's scheme of redemption. David, in the back, could you quote John 3:16?
God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that he should not perish in but have everlasting life.
Whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. That verse, I guess what I'm trying to get at, is so often quoted as the totality. If you'll just believe in Jesus, you're saved. I think that verse is taken out of context. In other words, in the realm of this is all I need to do to be saved. But it's a scripture. Did God say it? I mean, is it true? Yeah, it's true. But I've got to rightly divide the scriptures. All right, Ted, get your hand up.
It's not only taken out of context, it's also usually misquoted as saying, shall not perish,
Right.
instead of should not perish.
Yeah, very true. Because even the devils believe in what?
Tremble.
Devils believe. Yet they're not saved. So anyway, all I'm saying is, just because someone, in Matthew chapter 4, whenever Jesus was tempted of Satan, did Satan use any scripture in his temptation? He sure did. But did he use it correctly? Did he use it aright? He see? So, again, the point is, be careful. Because there are false teachers out there. And again, they don't hold up a sign saying, I'm a false teacher. You know, that's not the way it is. And some may even be sincere in their teachings. I'm confident, I know of people who, at least I believe, are sincere. Sincerity alone doesn't make them right. So, we've all got to be very careful. You know, the church here at Centerview has changed over the generations and in different ways. I talked about attendance 3 weeks ago. But the point being, after I die, Tony's gone. What's it going to be like in 20 years? Who will be here standing in the gap? Will they be rightly dividing the Scripture? Will they be honoring God's Word? That's up to you. Those of you who will be here. All right. We'll pick it up next week. I'm going to be out of town.
I won't point out one.
Go ahead, Ronnie.